A row has erupted over where to educate children with special educational needs. It's been sparked by Mary Warnock, widely credited as the architect of the policy to educate children with special needs in mainstream schools. It's nearly 30 years since her groundbreaking report helped open the doors of mainstream schools to SEN children. Government policy now advocates educating only those with the most severe difficulties in special schools. So 89%, some 1.3 million children with special needs, attend mainstream schools today. But now, in an apparent U-turn, Baroness Warnock has made the controversial claim that many of these children might be better off in special schools after all.
I think it's plain now that the notion of inclusion of all children in the same school is actually not working in a very large number of cases. I mean, there have been two very, very critical reports which, in a way, inspired me to write a pamphlet, and one was from the Audit Commission, who suggested that the notion of statements for some children and not others ought to be looked at again and perhaps had outlived its usefulness. And there was an extremely critical Ofsted report on how children who had disabilities of various kinds were actually getting on in mainstream schools, and the answer was dire, actually. It was really very alarming.
Mary Warnock's latest statements and these recent reports have reignited a heated debate about inclusion. This programme examines whether her concerns are justified, investigating current policy and practice, as well as hearing from a range of parents, schools and campaigners.
I think I was horrified like everybody else. It seemed it was founded on so little information. It had nothing to do with the world as I know it to be.
The pendulum may well have swung too far, and that having only inclusion does not provide the safety net for the more vulnerable and more sensitive in society that need it.
She's missing out on the deep and full human rights arguments and the social arguments. And I would ask Baroness Warnock, where would she draw the line on inclusion of disabled kids in mainstream schools? Who is in and who is out?
The 1970 Education Act finally ended the exclusion from school of children because of their impairments and embedded in law their right to education in schools, albeit mostly in special schools. The 1978 Warnock Report and the 1981 Education Act then paved the way for the inclusion policy we have today. The government says only those at the severe end of the scale should be educated in special schools. However, Baroness Warnock herself now disagrees.
Special schools have got this reputation, and government constantly reinforces this by saying, of course we must keep special schools. They are essential for the most severe and complex disabilities. And that is where I think the great mistake lies, because I think there is a place for special schools for children whose disabilities are not so profound, not so permanent, but who simply cannot settle down to learn in an ordinary school. And one of the most depressing things in the world, I think, is to hear a teacher or to hear of a teacher who says to a parent about her child, well, I think she's coping, I think she's managing. That schools should be places where people learn what fun it is to learn things and be able to do something you couldn't do yesterday. And of course, just containing a child or having a child there who can just about keep her head above water is not enough.
However, various pro-inclusion lobbyists argue that it not only works, it works well. They also insist inclusion is the only fair way forward.
What's important about completely inclusive education is that it is ending hundreds, if not thousands of years of mistreatment and prejudice against people who have needs that are considered different to the majority of people. The new Baroness Warnock paper was very disappointing, and shocking almost, because it seemed to be based on such a little piece of evidence, you know, believing that she knew, when it had nothing to do with the reality that we know on the ground, the wonderful things that are going on in mainstream schools, the efforts teachers have put into it, the benefits to children, both disabled and non-disabled children. And it seemed it was like a blow in the face of progress.
The difference between Micheline Mason's daughter's educational experiences and her own served to illustrate this progress.
I was incredibly isolated at home. I took my 11 plus at home, which happened in those days, passed, but was then told I shouldn't have been told that I'd got such a good score because there was no school I could go to.
I went to mainstream school ever since I went to preschool, nursery school, and I always went to school within my local community, so it meant I really managed to make good, strong friendships early on with people that lived nearby to me, which have kind of sustained themselves. And my life would look completely different if I hadn't been in mainstream education. I don't doubt it. I was one of a very small group of young people at the time that had that opportunity, and now I'm part of a very small group of young people that are going into higher education and are kind of getting to go out into the world. But it's clear to me that most of my peer group are not doing what I'm doing.
Baroness Warnock's main concern, though, is not about whether mainstream schools should include physically disabled children such as Lucy, but whether they're right for those with behaviour so challenging it risks getting in the way of learning.
Some of them are children with severe behavioural difficulties that have increased because of their failure at school. And so therefore, by the time they get to secondary school, they've given up on the whole idea of learning. It just isn't their scene. Whatever the actual cause of that is, they need to go to an environment which will enable him to learn. Because if children have a right by law to education, then it seems to me they have a right to be provided with somewhere that makes education possible.
In fact, the SEN and Disability Act 2001 placed legal duties on mainstream schools to make reasonable adjustments to ensure pupils with impairments were not put at a disadvantage. But the question is, how well have they managed to do this? The government asked pro-inclusion charity Disability Equality in Education to examine what makes for good practice. They concluded that success depended primarily on a positive attitude within the management of a school.
The thing that made the difference was there was a willingness to try. There was an ethos where people thought it was a human rights issue, that these children should be here, they live in our community, and we will transform our school, remove the barriers, develop techniques, we'll actually develop education for them, and we will support peer integration, peer support. Now, if you do those sorts of things with strong leadership from the school, there is no reason at all why it can't happen. The key issue for us as disabled people and in transforming education to inclusion is to recognise the difference between what we call medical model thinking, which sees the problem in the person, what's wrong with them, to see actually the problem is the barriers that beyond the person, barriers in the environment, barriers in the way we teach, barriers in language, and we need to remove those barriers to give people the rights and entitlement they have to access education alongside their peers.
Glossopdale in Derbyshire was one school judged to have got it right. The school has a long history of inclusion going back to the 1970s following the original Warnock report, with its success apparently countering Baroness Warnock's arguments.
There are several things that make inclusion work. One of the things from the school's point of view is that you need to have a senior management team who are very much behind inclusion, because that then filters down to the rest of across the rest of the school. And we have that here and have had for a long time. But we also have teaching staff who are very committed to it in all sorts of ways, not just the special needs staff, but the subject colleagues across. What we do works because the subject colleagues want to work with us on that. The children are part of all ability tutor groups, so although they might come out now and again for small group work to do with basic skills, if that's their difficulty, our main philosophy is that they're in school with everyone else, working alongside their peers, benefiting from the teaching of the main subject teachers, but with support in the classroom so that they can access what it is that's going on.
Glossopdale has nearly 2,000 students spread over 3 sites. It's fully comprehensive with the full range of abilities from students striving to reach basic literacy standards to those gaining entrance to top universities.
There are 40 staff on the special needs team. Of those, 12 are teachers and the other 28 are teaching assistants. Some of the teaching staff are linked to year groups, and they have an overview of the statement of students and all the students with special needs in that year group, and they'll go up through the school with them, so they get to know them very well. Other members of the team are linked to curriculum areas, so they'll work with those areas looking at curriculum differentiation, delivering, again, in-class support. And then we have some teachers who are behaviour specialists who work with those with challenging behaviours, and the teaching assistants are split between those 3 teams.
And with this level of commitment and resource, it appears they can succeed with children with a broad range of special needs. Gemma has Down syndrome.
Gemma's thoroughly enjoying it. She's working very hard, she's coping with her homework, she's continuing to mix, she's made new friends, she comes home from school very happy and seems to be learning a great deal, so she's settled in very well, even though she's only been here for 1 term. So we're very, very pleased with that. She's able to write, she's able to read, she's able to mix. She goes out to friends' houses for parties regularly, and that wouldn't be possible if she hadn't mixed with ordinary kids.
Even more complex special needs can be supported. Matthew is visually impaired, has learning difficulties and problems with his speech.
Matthew's not a delicate child. From being young, he's been involved. He does most activities that most other children do to a very good standard. He's always been pushed. Academically, he's not as good as most children, but he's prepared to work. He works hard and he tries his best, and that's all I can ask for. And as long as he has that support to work with him, which he does here at Glossopdale, then I'm happy with that. I think being at Glossopdale will prepare Matthew far better to going into the outside world, possibly working, than he would have been prepared had he been in a special school.
However, Glossopdale's success doesn't necessarily reflect what happens elsewhere in the country. The 2001 SEN and Disability Act may have strengthened the rights of children with special needs to an education in a mainstream school, but what's provided for them depends on where they live.
We think it's crazy that a child in South Tyneside is 24 times more likely to be placed in a special school than a child in the London Borough of Newham. Parents and their advocates and also teachers tell us this is a really crazy and inadequate way of interpreting the same law. We asked the Secretary of State to intervene and to write to the high segregating education authorities and to maybe meet with them and say, what is going on here? Your interpretation of the law is very different to many other education authorities in the country. And her department, has written back saying things are in place, there are local circumstances, and interpretation of the law will vary according to these local circumstances.